A warm welcome to this closing event of the first annual meeting of the Global Alliance of Regional Women Mediator Networks. Dear colleagues, friends, my name is Itonde Kakoma. I serve as the Director for Global Strategy at CMI, the Martti Ahtisaari Center, and it's my really high honor and privilege to moderate this very topical virtual dialogue on women, peace and security, moving beyond business as usual. Now, the Global Alliance of Regional Women Mediators Networks was formally launched last year, September 2019, and it is a global movement to enhance women's meaningful participation and influence at all levels of peace processes. The Alliance comprises of 5 regional women mediator networks, which together have more than 700 members worldwide. And you can see that on the map just before you. Now, today's event looks forward to the future implementation of the Women, Peace and Security in peace mediation, prompting us to jointly address this question: how to move beyond business as usual. Now, the audience will have a chance to contribute through various interactions of polls and questions throughout the course of our discussion. In fact, the first poll will pop on your screens in a moment, and the results of which will be discussed later on during the course of this program. Now, the poll asks you to identify the most significant trend that will define the next 2 decades. That is 20 years of women, peace, and security in mediation. We'll come back to those results shortly. Our topic today, though, could not be more timely, as next week marks the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And over the past 2 weeks, the regional networks of women mediators have convened a series of thematic working groups concerning the future of this agenda. And today we will hear insights and recommendations stemming from those deliberations and discussions. We will thereafter have a panel discussion with leading policymakers, practitioners, including members of regional networks, to jointly unpack these insights and recommendations. I'll be inviting my dear colleague to join us to walk through some of those observations. Well, Laura Henry, Project Manager in Women Peace Making Team at CMI, Martti Ahtisaari Center, most welcome. Always good to see you.
Thank you.
You've been working closely with all of the regional networks in coordinating this year's annual meeting. Tell us, Laura, what happened? When after the kickoff 2 weeks ago in the format of a virtual opening, what's taken place thereafter, and what was special about these working groups?
Thank you, Itonde. Indeed, during these last 2 weeks, we've had 5 different working groups. We've had altogether 15 sessions on Zoom. I think we were very positively surprised by the popularity of these working groups. We can see the members here presented on the screen. We had more than 200 members who participated in these discussions. I think this really highlights the need and value of such a forums that were convened in the context of this annual meeting. The 5 working groups were designed and led by the 5 regional networks. And these were truly platforms for cross-regional cooperation. They all reflected, as we can see here, the richness of these networks. We had actors from different levels, very different backgrounds, from local peace builders, UN representatives, regional organizations, civil society, and government. The networking is obviously one aspect of these important aspect of these networks. It's not easy to do online, but I think we did well in connecting the members and allowing exchange between the peers. On the positive side of things, I think when we did this online, we were able to include much more members than we could have if we did this face-to-face.
That's really good to hear. And tell us a little bit more. What were some of the themes discussed and how were they interconnected?
Definitely. So we had 5 different themes: protection of women mediators and peace builders, the impact of COVID-19 on local peace builders and especially women peace builders, the indigenous approaches to mediation and the role of women therein, hybrid mediation models, and the leadership of women in women, peace and security agenda. I think these are all highly relevant themes for the next 20 years of women, peace and security agenda, and we will hear about this more. They are also closely interconnected. We can see that the leadership of women is increasing, but this also raises questions about their safety, their security, about need for protection and other support for these women actors. It also raises the issue of needing to change the mediation, the praxis of mediation, whether it's how do we react to this pandemic now, or changing this, bringing together these indigenous approaches. And I think we will hear very soon how these working groups are pushing towards enforcing this agenda.
Really, thank you, Laura, for these insights, and we're looking forward to diving in deeper. I'll invite and turn to our colleague, Anna Sorainen, who will moderate the next part of our program, digging in further on the reports from the working group and the recommendations on the way forward for women, peace and security. Anna, I was looking forward to seeing you in studio, but I'm very pleased to learn that you are with us from home virtually. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Itonde. Yes, I would have loved to be there today, but I had a mild flu. I'm recovering, and you cannot be too careful these days. So I was really looking forward to being there at the studio with you. But Itonde, you are doing an excellent job with a very short notice. So thank you so much for stepping in for me. Thank you. It'll be very interesting to hear what the working groups have come up with. You heard the 5 themes. The following discussion will not be an actual panel discussion as such, but more of a report of the brief, the key findings of the working group. But maybe we'll take a round of introductions first to see who are the rapporteurs for these working groups. So please welcome conflict response specialist from the Women Mediators across the Commonwealth, Mrs. Sarah Cook. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Anna. It's wonderful to be here.
Welcome. Then we have the project officer of UNAIDS Liaison Office to the AU and UNICA from FemWise Africa, Mrs. Ledeth Beka. Welcome, Ledeth, as well.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be.
And we have also the advocacy coordinator from South Sudan Council of Churches representing FemWise Africa, Mrs. Pasca Niaboth. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And then the project officer at the United Nations Office at the Special Envoy for Syria from the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, Mrs. Ayat Mohammed. Welcome, Ayat, as well. And finally, the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Chair of the Equal Opportunities Committee at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and member of the Supreme Council for Women from the Arab Women Mediators Network, Dr. Shaika Al-Khalifa. Welcome as well.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be with you here today.
I'm so glad to see you all on the screen here. So we have posed you in advance 3 questions. And we are going to make 3 fairly quick rounds of answers. And this will give the audience a very clear picture of the key findings that you have come up with during the work of the working groups. And the first question was that what are the 2 key insights from your working group? So the general insights that you have come up with. And maybe we'll start with Mrs. Cook, please. Your theme was the protection of women mediators and peace builders. What were the 2 key findings?
Yes, indeed. We had a very robust and very broad-based international conversation about protection and the threats and the risks experienced by women peace builders and mediators in the field. And it was really interesting because we realized very quickly on in the conversation that the threats and the risks to women peace builders and mediators are increasing all the time. They're being experienced in new ways all over the world. And yet we're not really having that conversation. So I think the members of the working group were delighted to be able to have really constructive and deep-reaching conversation about how we can make some of those changes. So we had several insights related to this. One is that we need to mainstream awareness of some of the risks and threats being experienced on the ground, and that we also need to really push for protection frameworks to be created that are contextual and that really take into account the differences that women are in various contexts around the world, and that they be from the local to the global, so that we really span from local to national, international, the protection mechanisms that women can hopefully experience over the next couple of years. We also noticed that increased visibility and recognition of women mediators is very, very important. So we feel that with increased visibility and recognition, it'll really reinforce the legitimacy of women practicing in the field, and this in and of itself will lead to protection. We know that this is a bit of a double-edged sword because for women in some contexts, increased visibility actually creates more vulnerability. But we feel that this is a really important challenge to dive into, to see if we can increase visibility and create protection while also looking at some of the contextual issues potentially around that.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the impact of COVID, the working group number 2. Mrs. Nayaboth, what were you key findings in this working group?
Thank you very much. We had a very nice and very insightful discussion about the impact of COVID-19 for local peace building and also on local peace women or local women peace builders. And majorly, COVID-19 has affected broadly, if you look at what's happening in the continent, and especially in the different experience sharing that we've been having, we've seen that COVID-19 response in many contexts aggravated existing conflict drivers, and this is not limited to inequality, marginalization, unemployment, especially among the young people, and also the low-income earners, which are the women who are basically working on the streets and etc. And this also leads to increases in gender-based violence. We've seen reports that have been reported globally, in especially most in conflict-affected countries, where the rate of gender-based violence has really skyrocketed due to especially this COVID-19. And while the need for peace builders' efforts at local level is also greater than ever. And we also discussed further that local women peace builders are on the front line of sustainable peace building if they have, and their insights, capacity and broader potential must be mobilized to support national and global peace building to a much greater degree than is currently the case. And we also discussed further that the institutional framework for support to peace building needs to change in order for it to include the needs of local women peace builders. COVID-19 not only presents us with challenges for conflict-affected contexts and peace building, but it also an opportunity to see the need for change and take steps to transform the international institutional framework to be better equipped to support local peace building and local women peace builders. So basically, that's what we've been discussing much in the last couple of days. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and very important topic. And I could imagine that in the working group 3 as well, that this topic was discussed as well when we talk about women and indigenous knowledge in mediation and conflict. So maybe in this situation of the COVID-19, you discussed this as well, I would presume. But what were your 2 findings, Mrs. Decker?
Thank you very much. As it was mentioned from the other groups, our group also had a very in-depth discussion. And the two insights from the groups were that we understand there is a bridge of knowledge in understanding the actual role of women in indigenous conflict resolution and mediation. So the two insights from the group were deliberate assessment of traditional conflict resolution approaches that facilitate the integration of traditional approach with modern system, as well as give recognition to the role of women youth in conflict resolution and mediation. By this, we call on the reorientation of mindset to broaden the space in conflict resolution for women and youth. Other insight from the group was intergenerational transmission of knowledge through research and education, preserve African traditional values in peace and social cohesion. Those are the two insights from the group. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to working group 4, and your thing was hybrid mediation models. So, Mrs. Mohammed, what were your key findings?
Thank you. We had an intellectually intriguing conversation among the members, the different members of the group, and we've shared different lessons learned from each and every member's experience working with hybrid mediation, with hybrid approaches to mediation. I think we came to an understanding that given the current situation, that it's expected that we will continue to use hybrid approaches increasingly in our work. Despite that, it's not new to the field, using digital tools and creative technical tools in our work is not new, but with the COVID-19 and related restrictions, this give impetus to potential paradigm shift in the field. So we almost all agreed that practitioners need to embrace this shift and take the time to build their capacities, set the rules of the game, and not to give up to the digital hype. Among the key insights were the challenges and opportunities that hybrid approaches to mediation provide. And one of the key opportunities is wider opportunities for inclusion. Everyone can be included, regardless where they are, whether they are in refugee camps or besieged areas, women with, or whether or not they have the necessary travel documentation or visas, these kind of impediments that we all face in our work. So it gives more inclusion for women in traditionally marginalized groups and facilitates dialogue regardless of access issues. However, challenges such as security concerns remain in place, and also challenges such as internet penetration, access, and trust building is specifically challenging in virtual spheres. Some of the participants also shed light on what their organizations have tried to do in order to level the playing field for everyone, especially with regard to internet access and the internet literacy. And among the things that were mentioned was the selecting of digital tools that are easily accessible, smartphone friendly, providing training sessions for all the participants and interlocutors to be able to use the specified digital tools, and to provide satellite internet connection if possible, use VPN, pay for internet coverage, just to facilitate the internet connection to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can relate to the fact that we're trying to build the capacity to use all these tools which we're using right now, and this works well. So we move on to the 5th working group with the theme of promoting women's leadership. So Madam Undersecretary, would you please share us the 2 key findings that you had in your working group?
Yes, thank you. Well, Working Group 5 on promoting women's leadership in peace and security. Well, there was a broad agreement that any efforts to promote women's leadership in peace and security should be informed by the following principles. Leadership is not a static concept, and that it can be expanded to take into account a broader set of skills and roles and constructs, and we should support for change should come from the form of a long-term investment. The current efforts are highly projectized, which reinforces pessimism tokenism, and competitiveness in the field. And building alliances and education are key to seeing progress in the domain, especially in terms of engaging with men at the community level as well as men in positions of power. And there is no one-size-fits-all solution, so the measures must be adopted to suit the specific context. So the key insights is, one, promoting women's leadership requires a long-term investment, and rejecting the projectization of the inclusion agenda that are tailored to the socio-cultural, geographic, or conflict context. And the second thing is women leaders must pursue innovative and transformative approaches to achieving lasting peace and increasing complex conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the first round of questions. And I think we're going to take the same round the other way around. So, Madam Undersecretary, you could maybe continue with the second question that we had for you. And that was that what are the two main recommendations for the policymakers? And this is, of course, very important. And I could actually, from the first set of answers, there were already maybe some messages to the policymakers as well. But just in brief, we have about 5 minutes for this round. So brief recommendations for the policymakers, please, Madam Undersecretary.
Well, recommendations for policymakers. The first one is put your money where your mouth is, establish and endow a global regional trust to provide financial support and professionalism development resources to women mediators, and to ensure that the trust can be geared towards women working at all levels, including by engaging local players and developing their management capacities and financial skills. Second one is put your mouth where your money is by engaging in the politics of the WPS advocacy by making symbolic and financial support to peace processes at all levels, as well as mediation programming conditional on the essential and full inclusion of women, especially in the positions of leadership.
Thank you very much. What about concerning the hybrid mediation model, Mrs. Mohammed, for the policymakers? What are your key messages?
Well, we have three sets of messages or recommendations. The first is to facilitate a dialogue between the peace building field and the IT industry with the aim to create custom-made tools that respond to the needs of the field. And second is to promote the digital literacy of the peace building organizations by making resources available, including funding, adaptive budget to provide tools, research, participatory processes, etc. And finally is to develop a systematic approach to hybrid mediation, mediation work, including modalities, objectives, and rules of the games.
Thank you very much. And we moving on to Mrs. Decker from the Working Group 3. What were your messages?
Okay, our two recommendations for policymakers is develop, champion global, regional, sub-regional policies on alternative conflict resolution approach. A special request for FEMWISE Africa to advocate for indigenization of multilateral conflict resolution approach. For states to legitimize indigenous traditional approaches that are human rights and gender sensitive. Last recommendation for policymakers are multilateral international organizations should give due recognition and clear direction for consideration of local traditional approaches to peace building and conflict resolution within their institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We all know that COVID-19 is actually concretely on the table of every single policymaker in this whole wide world. But concerning our theme today, what were your recommendations when it comes to COVID-19 and its impact on peace building? Please, Mrs. Nayabath.
Yeah. So first, the working group recommends that international support to women peace builders must be strengthened and aligned with their needs, including being long-term, flexible, accompanying, process-oriented, and based on trust in their ability to lead the way, also, especially in the midst of COVID-19. And the second recommendation is that psychosocial support to local women peace builders must be equally provided as an integrated requirement of any international engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mrs. Cook, what were your recommendations concerning the protection of women mediators?
Thank you. The first and primary recommendation is really that protection mechanisms and frameworks be established at all levels. Importantly, we felt that it was vital that these start from the grassroots up or from a bottom-up approach, because we were recognizing the vulnerability that many grassroots practitioners face. There's a big difference between the threats experienced by women at the track 1 level and at the track 3 level. So we're really encouraging governments to look from the grassroots upwards and to mobilize frameworks that really pull into play security forces, governments, and social and civil society organizations that can work together within these frameworks. The second recommendation was that we really start working with security forces, both public and private, to really try to find some ways for them to become bought into this notion of the protection of women mediators and peace builders. Specifically, we've suggested both training and sensitization work, which would hopefully transform attitudes and approaches to the work, as well as developing a much deeper understanding of some of the risks and threats experienced by women mediators and peace builders. And then finally, to be part of the enforcement of whatever mechanisms and frameworks are established.
Thank you very much. We are moving on to the final round of questions. And the third question was, we have now in the audience lots of members of the Women Mediation Networks. So what is your message to the audience and actually to the mediator networks right now? What are the recommendations that you found while working in these groups? And I think we're going to start now, let's see, with Mrs. Teka.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. The two recommendations for regional network is to document, disseminate, and champion traditional peace approaches as part of the heritage of the people. We call on regional networks, including Global Alliance, to commission a study on different indigenous approaches that are human and gender sensitive, as well as to look into the nexus between indigenous approaches and governance system. Our last recommendation for regional network is to create a platform for exchange of lessons learned, good practices from different parts of the world on women's role on indigenous and traditional approaches. It will also help to enhance the capacity of local women and mainstream the indigenous and modern conflict mediation practice in Africa and elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then we move on to Mrs. Nayaboth.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation to the different networks of women peace builders, one of them is to push for stronger recognition of the importance of local women peace builders for sustainable peace, for adequate, timely, and relevant support for their work, for increased attention to value of drawing on their sound peace building expertise and at the national and global level. And the second one is to play a key role in increasing the visibility of national and cross-national women's networks, link better with with other women rights platforms and initiatives, and provide support and space for listening to women peace builders' stories as a contribution to psychosocial support and self-care. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. You don't know the order of the answers right now, so I'm using my power here. So next we have Mrs. Mohammed.
Thank you. So we have 3 recommendations for the networks and the Global Alliance in general. First is to develop the capacity of the networks mediators to develop or adopt a hybrid approach to their work and enhance their capacity to use new tools when suitable in their work. And second is to convene a dialogue to reflect on the conflict sensitivity considerations and implications of using and adopting hybrid approaches. And third, to share and continue to, because we've already started, but to continue to share experiences, lessons learned, and success stories across the networks, especially with regard to what worked, what not, which tools to use, integration of artificial intelligence, and quantitative research tools. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharing the best practices has been mentioned many times already, so that's something that we can take away from this discussion. Please now, Madam Undersecretary, what are your 2 recommendations for the network?
Well, our recommendations for the network first is to build deployability, to share our databases, rosters across networks with a view to standardizing the approaches, recognizing, legitimizing members as mediators, and broadening the reach of expertise, agreeing to a strategy of exchanging our best practices, as you said, the opportunities to incorporate elements of mentoring to increase the junior members. And the second one is to engage in a wider range of stakeholders, including male allies in a global alliance or a regional network of endeavors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, you have the pleasure of concluding this panel discussion or round of reports. Please.
The Working Group on Protection really wanted to strongly encourage the networks to lead on the notion of making psychosocial support and self-care a mainstream issue within the Women, Peace and Security agenda. We felt that we can use existing expertise and develop new expertise within the sector to really begin to make this an important part of how we do our work as women peace builders and mediators. We also felt it was important to really encourage with the development of national action plans for protection to be upfront and center. So that to be included in every national action plan that's being developed from here on out. We also really wanted to encourage the networks to endorse ICANN's Women Peace Builders Protection Framework, which was launched yesterday. We want to really encourage the focus on operationalization of this and to bring this to life and to really support as networks what that can look like. There are 4 main pillars within that framework that really reflected our conversations in the working group. And very briefly, those are building a legal and political safety net for women mediators and peace builders, prevention and mitigations of threats being experienced in the field, security at the peace table and in international spaces, and finally, emergency relocation and assistance for women mediators and peace builders who need that. There will be an event taking place tomorrow that will explain a little bit more broadly ICANN's framework. That's taking place tomorrow at 9 a.m. EDT, and it can be watched on Facebook Live. So people are very welcome to come along and to get a deeper glimpse into some of the conversations that we experienced as well within our working group.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all you ladies around the world. This concludes our very brief round around the world and the themes that were discussed in the working groups. And I have to say that you have an amazing ability to be very concrete and very brief. So I'm sure that this gave a very clear picture to our audience today of the findings in the working groups. And I think that there was a lot of content for the second panel to discuss as well. Thank you from my part to the panelists and to you all, dear audience, and to Itonde.
Thank you, Anna, and to representatives from the working groups for sharing those recommendations on the way forward for the Women, Peace and Security agenda. I am really pleased to welcome someone I consider a friend and mentor, a distinguished member of the Nordic Women Mediators Network, Ambassador Sirpa Mäenpää. After considerable service for the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs as ambassador, you now serve as senior advisor for the center, newly established Center in Mediation, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland. And I understand you've been participating in a number of the working groups. Share with us your impressions. How did you experience them personally? In a few words, what was it like?
Thank you, Itonde. It's really great to be here. The new format of the working groups was, in addition to these groups prepared by the individual regional women mediator networks, we also then broke into breakout groups. And as you have heard, it really was a working meeting. And we feel that it was very productive. The discussion was lively, as always, and the formats, because of the possibility for each participant to really engage. So I'm sure they are happy in having had more interactive meeting. And obviously, for many of us, seeing on our screens so many new members with the increased number of members that could attend, particularly more local mediators, more members of this new Arab Women Mediator Network. It was fascinating to see them, but we didn't have sufficient possibility to really talk to each other. So maybe we were too much focused on working. We would have needed a hangout cafe as well.
Understandably, but how did you see this first annual meeting contributing to or advancing the work and agenda of the Global Alliance?
Well, now that we are celebrating 20 years anniversary of the Resolution 1325, so in general, the numbers of women's participation in mediation processes are still too low, very low. But what is special in these networks is that they consist of women who have been part in some capacity of mediation processes at different levels. And from the very beginning, we have therefore wanted to share our experience and draw the lessons learned in order to multiply that experience. And as you have heard, we really worked hard on that. The other aspect has been, of course, in addition to intensified work, this movement is still expanding. The Arab Women Mediators Network is the most recent member, and we have had some observers from new Regional Women Mediators Network to see how we work and whether they wish to build their movement and join.
Now, Ambassador Mainpaa, having been privileged to observe the inner workings of those groups on really pressing subjects, what would you say briefly are the key insights or areas that you would take away and wish to share with the wider audience today?
Yes, I really had this privilege of a all-over pass into all the groups, and I would like to pick two examples. One was this African Union Women Mediators Network, FemWise, that really looked at specific cultural systems in Africa that where traditional peacemakers work on reconciliation, and particularly those where women are the traditional peacemakers. And it was very interesting to see how different they were, but also that those members could then draw jointly common conclusions on them. The other one was from the hybrid mediation models, the network that studied them. I really felt that we were listening to the technological cutting edge of peace tech. There was, for instance, an example of UN political missions, special envoys listening to, through digital dialogues, even 1,000 people at the same time. The example was from Yemen for these questions on national ceasefire. And it was fascinating how our members immediately then also went into the issues of this inclusion means, like how was the artificial intelligence used there. It was basically for clustering the questions before human moderators. And now that we hear that these digital dialogues are continuing, the most recent was carried out in Libya with the youth. So I think that sisters, we really have to learn and share a new civic skill of keeping our questions and remarks very brief and to the point, in order to pass the gatekeeper robots to be included.
Well, thank you. I mean, as you say, that's a cutting-edge example of how to advance this agenda. Sirpa Mainpaa, Ambassador, Senior Advisor in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Finland for mediation. Thank you so much for sharing these reflections. We'll now continue with our final panel, moving beyond business as usual on women, peace and security.
Thank you, Itonde.
the future of women, peace and security agenda, how to move beyond business as usual. That is the question we will tackle with our closing panel today. Now, we will hear from leading policymakers and practitioners, including members of regional women mediator networks, on how the next 2 decades, that is 20 years of this agenda, will and should look like. We will also encourage you as audience to engage, again, through virtual poll and question means. You should soon see a tab appear on your screens through which you can submit questions. I encourage you to utilize that tab. Now, let us begin by reflecting on the results of the first poll that you've replied to at the beginning of our event today, just so you remember the most significant trend that will define the next 2 decades, 20 years of women, peace, and security in mediation. And we'll look at those findings now. We had the crisis of multilateralism, growing use of digital methods in mediation, the rise of conservative and exclusionary politics, effects of climate change, or none of the above. So hopefully soon we'll see those. And in the meantime, I will turn to our panel to introduce the subject matter. We have first Ms. Teresa Whitfield, who serves as Director of the Policy and Mediation Division of the UN Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs. Teresa, I'm looking forward to hearing your reflections and engaging, as usual, in robust discussion. We also have with us today Ms. Robina Nurimba, who is the founder and national coordinator of the Coalition for Action on Resolution 1325 in Uganda, and who is a member of the women mediators across the Commonwealth. I understand, Robina, you're also the executive director of the Center for Women in Governance. We'll look forward to hearing your reflections shortly. Mr. René van Ness, a long career with the European External Action Service and currently serving as the head of division on conflict prevention and mediation support in the Directorate for Integrated Approach for Security and Peace. René, most welcome. We look forward to hearing from you very shortly. And we have Ms. Tushimi Mina, chair of the Chalupe Foundation and member of the FemWise Africa, also managing the Africa Development Solution Labs expert, focusing on the monitoring and reporting of human rights violations by armed forces and groups. Mireille, we'll look forward to hearing about how you observe the next 20 years ahead. Ms. Kirsi Henriksson, director of the Crisis Management Center, CMC Finland, and a member of the Nordic Women Mediators Network, recently appointed as president of the Geneva Center for Security Governance, DCAF, and have prior experience working throughout the Sahel, as well as North Africa and Iraq. We look forward to hearing from you shortly, Kirsi. And last but not least, Ambassador Grata Verdandgidas, Deputy Permanent Representative at the Indonesian Mission in Geneva. And prior to this, she served as the Director for International Security and Disarmament at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she headed the Directorate in charge of Indonesia's non-permanent membership in the Security Council. We'll now try to turn to the polls, if I'm not mistaken, to see those findings and hear initial impressions from our colleagues. Perfect. So, question was, what is the most significant trend that will define the next 20 years of women, peace, and security in mediation? Okay. A, crisis of multilateralism. If I get this correctly, we got 16.2% saying crisis of multilateralism, 23.4% saying the growing use of digital methods in mediation, 23.4 there, 41.4% saying the rise of conservative and exclusionary politics, 41.4, and you got 14.4% concerned by the effects of climate change on the women, peace and security agenda, and then 4.5% results on none of the above. So, Teresa Whitfield, I turn to you. Your initial impressions on these findings. Is Teresa online with us today?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Itonde, and welcome. And it's great to be with you. Nice to see colleagues. I'm really sorry I haven't been able to be participating in more of what, from the readout, seemed to be fascinating and really helpful conversations. So thank you for that. You asked me on the polls. My initial reaction was probably just as well there wasn't an option for all of the above, because I think at this moment what we're facing is all of the above, and I also and there is no way, and I'm increasingly thinking as we're thinking at this 20th anniversary of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, there's no way not to be on the one hand thinking all of the above are the challenges and the very difficult context that we're working in. But I also think, and some of the discussions that you've had this week and the findings of the working group suggest, we also have to maintain the kind of glass half full rather than the glass half empty approach, and think that what we do and what your discussions have reflected is that we respond to these challenges with all of the above in terms of the many different actions and ideas that have come forward. And it's something that we're increasingly recognizing at the UN. It isn't a question of you think about local peace builders or you think about inclusion, meaningful participation in negotiating panels, or you think about advisory groups, or you think about expertise coming in. We have to be thinking about all the above with a long-term perspective of recognizing that this is essentially, representation is about power and participation. So we need to be thinking about power and participation from the grassroots up, in structures, in governments, and then have that reflected in our peacemaking and peace-building work.
Very clear, Teresa. And as you were speaking about all of the above, reflecting the complexity of the challenges we face today, I saw several heads nodding in affirmation. So we'll see if that was a right reading of the bodily response there. Rubina Rubimbwa, initial impressions, if you would, madam, on the poll and the response.
I would certainly agree that it's all the above, and thanks for having me. But I would think I would put more emphasis on the rise of conservative and exclusionary politics. Conservatism is Western. In Africa, we are seeing more extremism rather than conservative, because we don't have that conservative concept. But we have a lot of extremism. Extremism of kinds, including state extremism, but all that is laid by the politics of exclusion. I do agree that you cannot, we shan't be able to focus on just one as the only outstanding one. We will work these years over the 20 or so years. I can see the effects of climate change as a grassroots builder in Africa. The effects of climate change are intense, and we must address them. We must deal with them. They are real, and their impact on inhibiting the security and safety and peace of the woman of Africa, it is just indescribable. Of my is happening every same as mediation. Look at us. This so thank you.
Thank you, madam. And I'm just gonna say real quick in crude form, try to summarize the depth of what you said, because the line is a bit poor. So I'm hoping our technical team will be in touch with you to steady that line. But I hear you agreeing fully with Teresa's remarks, but also drawing a contrast. Yes, all of the above. However, in the context of Africa, extremism, versus conservatism, if you will, is more of the challenge. And I heard you more emphatically through this unsteady line there, stressing the impact of climate change also on all of the above. So we'll come back to that. And if our colleagues in the technical team can ensure that we hear from you very smoothly moving forward, I would be grateful. Renee, it is good to see you also. I hope you heard the introduction all. Tell us your initial impressions from the poll findings, briefly if you would. You might want to unmute your line. There you are. I saw you ready to jump in. Perfect, we hear you.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Exactly. After 8 months of lockdown, I'm still muting myself.
Keep you on your toes.
What I said is great to see all these colleagues, great to see you, Itonde. I wish we could do this in real life. You started by saying, what will it look like in 20 years? Well, let me briefly respond and say, I hope in 20 years there is no need for a meeting like this. In 20 years, it should be so understood that women play a role that we don't need to talk about that anymore. So I really hope that this is one of the last meetings because then there is no more work to be done here. Polls. It reminded me of an important poll that will happen in about 2 weeks. And I think that poll may actually have an impact on all of the issues that were offered here as an option. I wouldn't say that determines everything, but it will certainly have an important impact. Multilateralism, definitely, absolutely crucial. And I'm almost shocked that it is among the lowest. As you know, the EU is a very keen supporter of multilateralism. Whatever we can do, we will, as we are absolutely determined to protect and keep an international rule-based society. The others are basically describing my agenda. I thought someone had access to my work program over the next few months, but because I'm working on the digital agenda, we're working very hard on inclusive approaches, which is part of a response to exclusionary policies. I think that's really one of the norms and values of EU mediation. And climate change, we're only starting to look at that. That is going to be one of the biggest game changers that we can see. I'm happy I didn't have to vote. Climate change for me is a really important one, but all the others should not be forgotten. Thanks, Itonde.
No, thank you. And just so we're not left in the dark entirely, and reading between the lines, the poll to which you were referring in 2 weeks' time would be the elections in the United States, I believe.
That's an important poll as well, yes.
All right, got it. So, Mireille Tushiminina, most welcome. Initial brief observations on the poll and the findings reported back.
Sure, thank you so much for having me. I will not repeat what others have already said, but my personal reflection is like we're all affected by it, and how we move forward will define peace and security amongst men and women. So, all of those trends matter, and we can easily destabilize it today and ruin all the hard work that we have put in for the next year.
Very clear. Thank you. And we'll come back to that hard work that needs to be done moving forward. Kirsi, if you would, please, initial impressions on the poll and the findings, briefly, if you would.
Yes, thank you very much. And definitely I align with the previous speakers. Your analysis is correct. I would just point a little bit to one thing which is not here on the list, and this is definitely a Eurocentric view and a Nordic view, is actually linked to the multilateralism. Is that what I'm concerned is that the good work what has been done during the past 20 years is not moving forward in a right speed, and we are taking steps back. And somehow I have to also justify here back home that for our donors and decision makers that this is important and we have to keep it on the agenda. It would be great if we could stop meeting each other, like René van Ness said. But we also need kind of to continue to the hard work with the people who have been supportive of the agenda, Women, Peace and Security agenda. Thank you very much.
No, thanks are to you and colleagues for initially reflecting upon those polls. And we'll now turn to questions that emerged from the working groups. So each of the working groups, as described, have also posed questions to you. And good, I see you back online there. So we'll proceed to our conversation by first focusing on the WHO. That is, the WHO participates in peacemaking. But before doing so, I'm going to turn to Grata, if you would. Share, please, your initial insights on the poll and the findings we saw.
Thank you, Ntonde. I'll try to be very brief. I think I share, I echoed some of the elements being mentioned by my fellow panelists, which I'm very much honored to be part of this very extraordinary people here at the panelists. Now, yes, we see that some of the elements mentioned that considered to define. But as a woman, I've been trying for so hard in so many years in my life not to make other people define us, or the situation define us. When we talk about, for example, the rise of conservatism, we should look at our own society. It is a reality that most of the conservatism or in exclusiveness politics are championed by very few numbers in our society. When I look at this poll, my question is where the people who in the middle, the moderate, because that's the reality in my own country. The moderate probably are the majority of the people who will do all the work, all champion women. So when I look at this poll, I always look at moderate because this is our ally. They are the one who will turn some of these very negative element that will, trend that will, of course, in some way will jeopardize the work that we have been made. So we need to, and when we talk about conservatism, we should look the people, the moderate, the champion of moderate, the liberal. This is where we should, focusing all our energy. When we talk about the crisis of multilateralism, I think we should look on our own region. The crisis of multilateralism doesn't mean it's the end of everything. Yes, we champion multilateralism, but when you look at the conversation with the working group, we recognize also regional approach. So this is also our way to build the pillar. And I'm glad that I have the opportunity to talk with the Global Alliance, because what the Global Alliance built is actually a pillar of connecting and networking with the regional women in every continent. So I think we should see the positive side. We should see the other argument of this trend that we'll present it in the school. Thank you.
Thanks are to you, Madam Ambassador. And we'll now turn to the questions to all of you from the working groups, and we'll start with the WHO. So, on protection, the working group concerning protection. Looking at women's leadership in peace and security, increased visibility often comes with increased risks to personal safety. Threats to the security of women peace builders and mediators have received little attention to date. The question being, what support mechanisms must be developed for the protection of women peace mediators and peace builders? Teresa, I'm looking to you.
Thank you very much, Itonde. And I think this is a central issue, and it was actually one of the 6 priority areas that UN Women identified going into 2020. And there was an ARIA Formula meeting, which is a sort of side meeting that the Security Council has with experts, a sort of informal expert consultation on this very issue earlier this year. So I would say it's an issue that's kind of foregrounded in our attention. I think, but like many issues, when we come to responding, the need to be context specific is really important, because the different kind of issues, there's a broad across the board problem, and then there are responses which happen on the ground. From our side, I can think of it coming in terms of the work. It's a consistent issue, for example, in the work of our electoral assistance division. We much broader than if we have a certain number of peace operations and peacekeeping operations and things which are very visible. Every year, the UN provides electoral assistance to around 50 countries, so it's very broad. And one of the issues that's absolutely central is a kind of gendered approach to issues of protection and participation. So that's one concrete thing. I'm also thinking in mission contexts, we're learning quite a lot about what we can do. It helps if there is, if the basis for the mission and the mandate, if the agreement is gender specific, it gives the UN much more scope to engage with proper resources, rather than it being a kind of generic preoccupation, which it would be on a rights basis in any way. I'm thinking we just launched, some of you might have been on the call, we did a big study on what we've learned in Colombia. And Colombia, as many of us were aware, had a very gender detailed peace agreement. Gender's featured very strongly in terms of implementation. Issues of security and protection have been huge because there's been targeted of women peace builders, of human rights defenders. And I kind of, the studies, a bit of publicity, the studies available on the UN Peacemaker website in English as well as Spanish. And it's interesting because it's got kind of nitty-gritty details of the kind of things we've been able to do in accompanying women former combatants and working with human rights defenders as well.
Very clear. And I now turn to Mireille on protection. Tell us what support mechanisms. Teresa's outlined some that are already in place and moving forward. Please continue.
Yes, just to build on what Teresa already said, also add, we need a strong accountability mechanism as well. I mean, when it comes to protection of women, peace builder, and young women as well, and mediators, we can never predict the nature and form of future threat of violence. So to avoid repeating the cycle, this women peace builder needs to be aware that there is a strong accountability mechanism. The perpetrators will be held accountable. And also, they are protected, doing their work. I mean, reflecting on the past work that I have done in Cameroon. I mean, living in the Southwest region, it's really hard to navigate, and especially when you are trying to mediate around, amongst armed groups and states, state group. So we need that. We need to create that space. We need to reinforce those mechanisms, and we need to start now. The UN regional women mediators and regional organizations have the daunting task on their hands with a clear inclusive agenda, a clear long-term strategies while taking account the regional implications and the context specific. I'm pretty sure that the next 20 years will be good.
Very clear. Now, I'm mindful, Kirsi, of your role both as director of the Crisis Management Center in Finland and now serving also as president of the Geneva Center for Security and Governance. I'd be keen to hear your reflections on protection, but actually, I'm going to move to the next working group's question on leadership. But please integrate as you see fit. So, Women's Leadership Working Group, here's the question posed to you. Previous efforts to promote women's leadership in peace and security have been largely short-term and at times reinforced elements of tokenism and competition in the field. So the question being, how can the international community broadly speaking, support women mediators and peace builders to improve their participation and representation? Kirsten, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, first we have to recognize that unfortunately also amongst the international community, we compete with each other when we are trying to get women in a higher positions, those ones who are actually perhaps making big decisions in the field, in the areas of operations, in the conflict areas, how to empower women networks. So this, we have to admit this reality, and we have to be realistic and tackle that also, because we should stop competing with each other in order to support the local peace builders. And how to support the local peace builders, I still think we still have this vicious cycle of not coordinating enough. We also compete with someone. Some organization is perhaps supporting some networks and some other for another network. Everything is needed. You have to have a kind of a more centralized support, perhaps at the capital level, but definitely you need to include women in a remote areas. For example, I work very closely with the women in Agadez and in Niger, and that was very rewarding. So you have to do that, and you have to kind of connect also various networks with the other international actors, so that we have a kind of an understanding who will need the support, what could we need, what can we do more to support the local networks, because that is actually the aim. So definitely, I'm sorry I don't have any quick response or quick answer to this problem. I still think that if we acknowledge that this is the situation, that we have to move forward to the common goal, then we are already getting there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Robina, I'd like to raise the question from the working group on local peace builders to you. But before doing that, I'm going to continue on this question of women's leadership. Ambassador Verdin Gitias, Deputy Permanent Representative, Indonesian Mission in Geneva. But if I understand correctly, you were heading previously the directorate in charge of Indonesia's non-permanent membership on the Security Council. Reflect on this question from the working group on women's leadership. Help us understand what kinds of support mechanisms should be put in place by the international community.
Thank you, Tande. Just for the record, I am the first woman who headed the Directorate for International Security and Disarmament Affairs in my Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Most my predecessor are men, and my successor is also men. So I think in terms of leadership, this is some issue that are actually very interesting, because if you look at the discussion about when we talk about local woman peace builder, some of the leadership coming in the community are very much organic. But when we try to bring it at the regional or national level, then it becomes, tokenism. There is a very difficult process for us to bring this organic leadership coming from the community to the higher level. There is a question about capacity, and also question about the opportunity for women to have the entry point to enter the leadership at the higher level. I think the key is opportunity, and also a chance of gain more knowledge, because the different kind of level of field need a different kind of capacity. And that's why for me one of the important thing is how we can create some sort of like mentorship for women leadership. I think that's important, and we make it much more organic. I think that's the question. And the other thing is just one more. During our membership in UN Security Council, we come up with the resolution on women in peacekeeping, resolution 2538. When we are talking not only creating enabling environment for women peacekeepers, but we are talking about giving women opportunity at the senior level ranking officer within the UN mission, UN peacekeeping mission. So that's one of the element that, again, we try to promote in terms of women leadership.
Thank you, madam. Now, before turning to the question of local peace builders, Renee, you're in a critical position with regards to heading a unit in the European Union that is dealing with mediation support. So on the question of women leadership in mediation processes, help us understand. How do you create those systems and support from the international community?
Thanks, Itonde. I'm happy to say that my predecessor was a woman. All my staff are women, and probably my successor will be a woman. So I'm the only man that is also in this panel. To your question, Itonde, actually, you triggered an interesting reflection, because your question was about long-term investments. And as we are about to start the programming of the next 7 years development program of the European Union, which is the biggest development program on the planet, I had no idea actually, 80 billion euros over the next 7 years. So that process is about to start now, where all the delegations in the world are asked to start, how do you want to spend that money over the next 7 years? And I wanted to know, what do we actually ask our colleagues to do when it comes to women, peace and security? Well, in specific to women, peace and security, we are not asking them a lot, but we do ask them actually something that is quite remarkable, because we have a legally binding target, legally binding, that 85% of this money, so that is 68 billion euro, has to be focused on promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. That is a whopping amount of money. And so that is only part of the answer. But when you asked, how are you going to make sure that it is not a tokenism? How do you make sure that you have a long-term investment in this? Well, this is surely contributing to a long-term investment, as for the coming 7 years, this will be what we basically guarantee. Another thing that I'm working on myself is a new concept on EU mediation. We hope to have it ready before the end of this year. And as part of that new concept on EU mediation, we are drafting guidelines that we are sharing with all the EU practitioners on mediation. So these are our heads of delegations, the EU special representatives, senior colleagues involved in this. And we ask them to look at a number of things, related to climate change and digitalization, etc. On women, peace and security, we have a very clear chapter where we tell them, listen, you need to systematically promote consultations and participation of women throughout the design of your mediation process. We ask them to take, for example, protection and security of women into account right at the start of the process. This is not something that comes when you hit the problem. You need to budget for this. You need to make it part of your entire process. So with that, we hope to make this part of the structure, of the instructions, if you like, of the DNA of all the EU staff that is working on mediation issues. This is just part of the solution. I'm sure everyone can talk forever about this. Let me stop here for now.
No, very clear. Thank you, Renee. And we're going to turn to the working group now on local peace builders and the role women in local peace building, as they say, seldom receive the same attention as high-level mediation processes. And while we know the importance of the long-term peace building engagement. And so the question is this, and I'll turn to Madame Rubimbwa. How should the local peace builders across the world be supported so that their knowledge and capacity could better feed into and strengthen formal peace processes? And I'm mindful, Madam, of your founding director role of the Center for Women in Governance, also your role as a member of the women mediators across the Commonwealth, not to mention the Ugandan chapter on UN Resolution 1325. So please briefly shed light on this question from the working group.
Thank you. I would, as a local woman peace builder, I would urge the international community to narrow the gap between policy rhetoric and reality. while policy emphasizes inclusive peace processes and local engagement, what we see is that their local engagement still picks out the most visible. They do not go beyond the most visible, and they select their most visible from the regional bodies. For example, if you're looking for 2 or 3 African women, then you go to the African Union. You don't come to Uganda. You don't go to Kenya. So I'm looking at creating mechanisms for local grassroots women peace builders to apply their experiences and their expertise beyond the local context. For over 15 years, I was involved in local level, community level mediation work. And I had never received any training in mediation at all until about 3 years ago. So you can see, so we do this work from common sense. We build our expertise through experience. I think the world is the poorer for not utilizing our knowledge. So I have a few recommendations. Could the international community be our greatest cheerleader? Could they champion the role that we play? Could they invest in our work so that we have the resources to document what we do, to document the good practices that we employ, and the impact that we have had at the local community? Could they also enhance our participation and representation through increasing our professional development so that we don't continue to know only what we know, but we are able to get opportunities for learning? And also to create pathways for us. Like I'm working with a lot of young people. I'm developing the next generation of women peace builders. I would want this next generation of women peace builders to have pathways that have been deliberately created for them to develop their career in peace building and mediation by engaging in international processes, either working with international bodies and international agencies. So these pathways for access careers in these processes.
Perhaps that's
but also,
maybe a final point there. Apologies, madam. Please continue. Yeah.
Yes, the final point would be on financing. Sometimes it becomes difficult for the big donor to find their way to us because we don't understand the law frame, because we don't suit a particular criteria. But I think there are ways that we could access funding that would enhance our participation and increase our representation and capacity if international communities could invest either in international and global networks that could release funds to us, or establish these funds at the national level that we could access. So there are ways. I believe that where there is a will, there is a way.
Absolutely, and that's a powerful way to move into the next set of clustered working group questions. If we looked at the who, now the question, in a sense, is the how. That is the how of mediation. And I'll be more selective so that we can also hear from our audience questions, live audience questions. And so I'll only select 2 of you for the preceding questions here. So the first one is coming from the working group on hybrid mediation models. The global pandemic has intensified the use of alternative tools for mediation. Have you made use of hybrid mediation tools, including those made available through the internet and virtual communication technologies? What have been the advantages and the pitfalls? And how have you tackled security challenges and addressed the issue of building trust in this context? Teresa, I'm going to ask you that question.
Thank you very much, Itonde. And one of the sort of the upsides of this very difficult and tragic period of COVID has been the acceleration of learning that was already going on in terms of application of digital tools to mediation. And I would say particularly with reference to questions of inclusion. And we've really been doing a lot on this. As many of you know, within the UN, we were looking at this issue before. There's a digital toolkit on mediation, and we've established under me, I have the mediation support unit, under peace and security policy. Also, there's a new innovation cell, and we've been working on this. And it's had different capacities. There's sort of training on digital facilitation processes. We've also been using, and it was referred to earlier, kind of AI-powered technology to reach out for what broader consultations in Yemen, most recently in Libya with youth. Lots of upsides, lots of downsides as well. And I think most obviously are questions relating to access and the inequality of access of women to the platforms, even simple ones. And it's important to look at not just internet things, but what we can do through WhatsApp and things that are more easily accessible. And then questions of trust. And I think what as we move forward and we look forward to the kind of post-COVID world, we need to be very clear about taking forward those lessons and those tools which will accelerate our engagement with women and greater inclusivity in terms of consultations, but also recognizing what has to be done in person because of issues of trust, and making sure that we don't use the availability of digital tools as an excuse not to engage women at different levels in multi-track processes in person as well.
Very, very clear. We'll turn to the next working group, and I'm mindful there's considerable expertise on that question of hybrid mediation, so I hope you bring that back in for your final remarks, and perhaps we'll hear from the audience as well in this regard. So, on Indigenous knowledge in mediation, this working group, here's the framing that they provide for us. For instance, concerning Indigenous knowledge, African Indigenous approaches to peace and conflict remain somehow unknown globally and somehow also across the African continent, as per the working group's assessment. But they're saying it presents an untapped potential for peacemaking. And we heard a bit about that already from Robina. So the same observation may be applicable to other parts of the world as well, not least of which being in Southeast Asia or elsewhere. So how can we turn the use of Indigenous knowledge and mediation around to aid in the advancement of political will and commitment, also in terms of investing in there? I'll turn to you, Mireille, given your background, with African Development Solutions Labs expert, and also your work in monitoring, reporting on human rights violations by armed groups, as well as your role in FemWise Africa. Please, briefly, if you would, and we'll turn to the audience thereafter.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for this question. We do have a wealth of untapped knowledge and resources across the continent and most of the part of the conflict-affected countries. So, and having worked in these areas, what now, for me, looking at the next 20 years, we need to listen to more women, young women peace builders demand in order really to create the space for the different needs. And I'm looking at Indigenous women, rural women, and young women peace builders. I mean, the key to build build peace locally is to prepare these women in our organizing collective effort, so they can be able to meet opportunities when they present themselves. At the moment, for example, what is going on because of lack of coverage. We don't know, no one knows that at the moment that FemWise has just deployed electoral mediators in Côte d'Ivoire to engage with women political leaders, opposition leaders, mediators, and young women on the preparation for upcoming elections. So we want the right coverage. And I'm sorry because I'm really trying to get the point across. Is we are doing a lot of work, but really we are not really tapping the resources and really the narrative out there for African women. It's not really well narrated by others. And just to also add, and Renee's comment earlier on coordination, I mean, the coordination effort should not be based primarily on the concern and agenda of international actors and how do you want to frame our narratives, but rather be driven by local needs and what the women really want to be out there. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mireille. So now before hearing from the audience questions, we'll see the final poll, which concerns who should have the primary responsibility for moving the Women, Peace and Security agenda beyond business as usual. You should have it there, and you've got a set of responses. We'll come back to those at the end. In the meantime, I'm going to invite my colleague, Johanna Poutanen, who heads our Women in Peacemaking team at CMI Martti Ahtisaari Center, to share with you a couple of the questions that have come live from the audience. Johanna, if you could please join us. Got it. I got it. Thanks. Wonderful. Thank you. Johanna, over to you, if you would.
Well, we've had many excellent questions from the audience for the panelists, and many of them have been touched upon, but something they could be keen to hear more. If the panelists could tell more about their thoughts on the role of young people, particularly young women, in regards to peace building in the next 2 decades.
Well, thank you. I'm going to start with you again, Teresa, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize in advance because I'm going to have to leave quite promptly because I'm chairing something else. It's a very, very busy month, as everybody recognizes. I think it's a really critical question. And one of the sort of very important developments, I would say, in the last couple of years in conversations around the UN and in the field has been the rapid acceleration of attention to the youth, peace and security agenda. We have a very strong Secretary General's representative for youth from Sri Lanka. We're working closely with her, the work that Finland and others have done on thinking about inclusion of youth. And I would just say that it's a critical point when we're thinking about durable peace. If you're looking as a country, look at Afghanistan, for example, where peace talks getting underway, extremely difficult, as you could imagine, because it was always going to be difficult in peace. In Afghanistan, there's a whole generation of young people, enormous proportion of the population are under 25, a whole generation of young people who've grown up under war. For me, a critical aspect of the sustainability of any peace that can emerge in Afghanistan is harnessing the vision that those young people have for a future of Afghanistan that is different than the kind of wheeling dealings. And if it's just a stitch up amongst old, corrupt political and military elites, it won't last. But so we all need to be, it's a huge challenge for us, I think, in the peacemaking and peace building community. We need to be recognizing that in the youth, there is the potential and the hope and the future and the vision for the future. And therefore, it isn't a question of, is it a good idea to involve youth? It's an absolute necessity to think about how to harness that.
Teresa, Director for Policy and Mediation Division, UN Department for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs. Always a privilege to hear your reflections. Mindful you have something to chair now. So when you need to jump off, please do so. Johanna, we'll take one more question.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there's also expressed concern about the near universal disconnect between high-level peace negotiation and local peace building, and how that undermines the efficiency, chances of success, and durability of peace. So audience would like to hear what concrete action should bilateral policymakers and member states take to close this gap?
Grata, if you would, closing the gap.
First of all, I think first of all that as a policymaker, we need to recognize the people who are working on the ground, the women who are working on the ground at the local level, at the grassroots level, who are working for peace. And also try to make sure that their capacity are being linked with also people who have similar passion toward peace building. Now, one of the example maybe what we are doing, actually my Minister of Foreign Affairs are doing by establishing what we call the network of Indonesia and Afghan women. Now, the network is not talking about those people who are working at the highest level of peace negotiation, but we are trying to connect women at the local level at the grass level in Afghanistan, and also women in Indonesia who are working as a peace activist who has experience in reconciliation in some of the communal conflict in Indonesia, meeting together. So this is, I think, building building a pillar for recognizing by making sure they are part of the pillar of the national level reconciliation. So I think this is what we are trying to do. We want to make sure that Afghan women also learn from Indonesian women, and Indonesian women at the local level also learn from Afghanistan, and making sure that they are also part of the conversation at the national level.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Very clear. I think we'll conclude there and incorporate the rest of the questions from the audience into the recommendations from the working groups and so forth. Thank you, Johanna. We'll now turn to the findings of that second and last poll before hearing your concluding remarks. And the poll is saying who should have the primary responsibility for moving the women, peace and security agenda beyond business as usual. The numbers are still shifting, but I see the first A, United Nations, 5.8%. Renee will have to tell Teresa these observations when she's back online. B, 3.8% concerning regional organizations, 11.3% concerning member states, 5.7% civil society actors, 3.8% concerning regional women mediator networks. And here it is, as we came back in the beginning poll, where you all emphasized all of the above, 68.5% all of the above. So again, Kirsi, you were talking about this, coordination, complementarity. I'm going to start with you. As your concluding remarks, please reflect upon these findings in terms of who should be leading the way forward on the women, peace and security agenda in light of these. Kirsi, if you would kick off briefly for your final remarks.
Yes, definitely we have to do this together, but all of us, the regional organizations and the regional women mediators networks have a different role from, for example, from international community actors. And we have to recognize that we have also a lot of strengths. I mean, we have to do like the SWOT analysis. I mean, who has the strengths of doing something, and who has a little bit weaknesses to do, and then therefore should not perhaps do things, and then we can move forward. So this kind of SWOT analysis would be needed, but all in all, we need everyone, and everyone needs to recognize everyone.
Thank you, Kirsi, for these concluding remarks. Mireille, briefly, if you would, on the poll.
Yeah, sure. For me, it's not so much about this actor together, and being mindful that we forgot to add the private sector, which
That's
is
right.
really an important key actors really to push the agenda. But the women and the girls we empower so that they can take this agenda back to the community, countries, and sector. We are there to be the gateway. So in short, as a closing remarks, and I've been dying to say this, I mean, we have to start to work as inclusive networks. We have to start implementing these recommendations that are piling. We for the next 20 years, we have to start enforcing the WPS agenda at the national, regional levels. We have to start ensuring women inclusion and full participation. We have to start reactivating gender responsive framework and translating them in local languages for effective impact on the ground. And we have to start institutionalizing the National Women Mediators Network. We have to start challenging the status quo. We have to start addressing matters that many on the continent aren't keen to interrogate. We have to start shifting the focus on redistribution of power to include women mediators equally. Until today, women mediators and men mediators, there's no equality, they're not equal pay. So we basically, and we also need to start deploying election mediators. I mean, the next 20 years looks promising. I'm really optimistic that it will not take us 20 years to really achieve this agenda. But just bear in mind that this is our new decade. The future now, the future is
very
female,
clear.
is
Thank
young,
you.
and we are there. Thank you.
No, thanks are to you. Renee, observations briefly, if you would, on the poll. And I see you unmuted. Thank you.
Yes, I'm learning. Even I can do that.
Good.
I'm not sure. I think the poll result basically shows that people don't really know where that responsibility is. I was reflecting. Why is it so difficult? Why are we not making more progress? And I think it is basically, it's not because of the women. It's because of man. It's because of man that block, that stop, that keep patriarchal gender norms in place, that keep political and cultural conservatism in place. That is why this is such a difficult agenda. And that is why, despite all the efforts in 20 years, we are where we are today. And so my plea would be that we really need to involve men. And if I may make a bold proposal, is it possible to invite to the working groups of this meeting next year also men?
Very good.
I know they're not excluded. Can they be there? Can they be there maybe even from the conflict areas? Can we ask them why it is so difficult to involve women in this?
It's a fine question to raise as we conclude, and I think colleagues will take up.
I hope so.
Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Madam Rubimba, if you would, please briefly on the poll. I see your screen is frozen, so I will turn to Ambassador Gratta, if you would, Madam, on the poll.
Yes, I think, again, the polls show that the effort to promote the rights and the betterment of women are the responsibility of everyone. And sometimes when we are talking about this issue, I mean, after 20 years of WPS, I think when people talk to me after years what happened, I have a mixed feeling of being hopeful because in some way we are on the right track. I mean, in terms of, institutional and everything, but in terms of achievement, I was a little bit frustrated because there is no real work being done. But it's not giving us as much as we want in 20 years. We are hopeful for more in 20 years. So there's the frustration coming from. Now, when we talk about UN, we talk about regional organization. I think we should look deeper whether UN is already woman-friendly as an institution. Yeah. Regional organization, are they woman-friendly? And we talk about civil society actors. Again, all civil society actors work for women betterment or not? So that's, I think, the question that we need to look deeper when we talk about the poll.
Excellent.
The credibility of the organization we are mentioning here.
Thank you. Very well. And if you're back online, Madam Robina, a very brief word on the poll.
It's quite interesting. I'm intrigued by the percentage of civil society organizations. And again, I will echo what my colleague has just said, the need for emphasizing the role of local women peace builders. It must start from bottom up. And if that is recognized, then we can have a difference. So who has the responsibility? I think member states should have more responsibility by recognizing work that women in their countries do and promoting these women to engage at even higher levels. Because conflicts are in villages, they are in communities, they are not in New York, they are not in the AU or European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Very clear, and a word of great appreciation to all for today and the last 2 weeks. And in fact, the discussion today and over the course of these weeks have given us a lot of ideas on how we can collectively move the women, peace and security agenda forward. This event has been organized in very close cooperative effort by 5 regional women mediator networks, and we would like to thank you all for the hard work in making this annual meeting possible. We would also like to thank all of the partners of the Global Alliance and Regional Women Mediator Networks for supporting this important work toward a more inclusive peace. If you missed parts of these events, the recordings of the opening and closing sessions, and we're grateful for the panelists who provided and shared their insights to those provocative questions coming out of the working groups, they will be online in the Global Alliance YouTube channel. And the link will be shared with all of you in the next coming days. Now, finally, the Global Alliance looks forward to staying connected with you all. Please share your comments and observations on social media using the hashtag #WomenMediators. On my behalf, thank you all for being with us today and for these past 2 weeks. Most grateful to you.